Okay, hi everyone. I just started recording. If you're someone who couldn't make it, I'm just quickly going through these slides because I forgot to press record at the beginning of the meeting. We basically just discussed how ethics can help in a global crisis in this slide. And then if you're interested in ethics after this meeting, or if you already have an interest in bioethics, please join Bioethics, where UC Berkeley's undergraduate bioethics and medical humanities society. And yeah. We are brand new. We have no officers, no members. So if you're interested, shoot me an email back at that bioethical address. And then we discuss the 4 pillars of bioethics, which I guess you can Google on your own time. It's not necessarily that complicated, but yeah. And then right now we're in breakout rooms discussing this, and then we're going to reconvene. I hope this is recording. Yeah, this is a case study. Are you guys done discussing, or are you just looking at the question?
We're done discussing.
Oh, okay. Let me send out a message, like 30 more seconds. All right. Oh, I clicked close all breakout rooms, and now it's like the breakout rooms will close in 60 seconds. So I guess we'll wait 60 more seconds for the last group, unless they join. Okay, 20 seconds. Okay, everyone should be back. Hi. I hope you guys had some good discussions. So I think we're gonna go through each group and what they kind of came up with. So would breakout room 1 like to say what they thought about the 2 questions? Would the breakout room with Jenny and Mazin?
Um,
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I'll give a quick summary, and then if anyone wants to add in, like, that'd be fine. So basically, what I originally proposed, and then we kind of had a little bit of like back and forth on it, is that we we weren't really entirely sure of our choice, but we were kind of leaning patient A. And what we discussed is that, patient A still has a whole life in front of them when patient B, like, let's face it, they're old and frail. They've already lived their life. And I think it was Jenny who brought up the idea of using potential, or like looking at it in terms of potential, where person A, like, for example, if we were looking at us as college students, we have a lot of potential in what we could do with our lives that we haven't done yet. While, for example, one of our like grandparents would have already used said potential like throughout their life. And which is why, like, we were talking about patient A, which is that patient A kind of has more of the life in front of them when patient B has already lived their life.
Right. That's a really good take on it, kind of going on the pillar of beneficence, like doing the most good you possibly can. Obviously, you would have to do some maleficence, but like it's a net positive from your perspective because they have all that life to live. Yes. Would anyone else from that group want to say something or add anything?
So and then right before the breakout room ended, I also brought up how like no matter which person you choose, you're going to end up, there's like there actually isn't a right way to answer the question because you're
Right.
always going to end up hurting someone, right? Because these two people probably both have family members who would
Yeah.
be hurt by their death, right? So it's like you can answer certain things correctly based on which values you decide to focus on, but
Yeah.
there's always going to be yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of you're getting at like the core of bioethics right there. Like there's never really a correct answer, but in critically thinking about these decisions, we can become better, like I guess we're saying healthcare providers and medical practitioners, and we can better evaluate the decisions. So when it comes time to make an actual decision, we can obviously choose the best course of action. But obviously, yes, in this instance, since one saving one patient would result in the death of another. There's no way that we can adhere to this pillar here, non-maleficence, because we're always going to hurt someone. Yeah. So, if does anyone else from that breakout room want to say anything? We can move on to the next room. Okay, so breakout room 2, the one with Annika, Isha, and Safi. Do you guys want to say something?
So we talked a bit about like the question of whether we have a right to make this decision, and I think we were all pretty much in agreement that we don't really have the right to make the decision, but we have an obligation to, because if you don't make the decision, then both patients are going to suffer. So with
Yeah.
that, we agreed on that. But then with um, who the ventilator should go to, we were pretty split on that. Um, I think we also talked about the fourth pillar for social justice and whether we have to look at age as a social group. And then we talked about examining the word frail. So, what does frail mean? Is frail just like a label that we're putting on the patient because they're old? Or do they actually have any underlying health conditions that can lead us to like decide that they would not be able to like recover as well as the healthy patient would?
Right. That's something I'm really glad you guys questioned because obviously um, I consciously knew that this background is not the most comprehensive, and in a real case study that we would probably go through in a club meeting of bioethical, it would be we have a much more extensive background. So challenging those descriptors such as frail and healthy, like what do we use as a metric for frail? What do we use as a metric for healthy? And is that metric like actually like fair? Are we disenfranchising like people who seem elderly or frail in our eyes? So that is definitely an interesting and good thing to consider. And yeah, anyone else from that group want to say anything?
I think
Awesome.
Safi also
Go ahead.
brought up a really cool point. Because initially I thought this was, oh, it's pretty clear to me, but then when she brought up this point, I was like, oh, I don't know. But she was also talking about like who would recover better if they didn't have it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Safi.
Yeah, so I was kind of confused. Do we have the power to predict that who would recover better even without a ventilator? So let's consider patient A who is young. Let's say that they do need a ventilator, but would they be able to live even without a ventilator as opposed to patient B who is
Right.
very old and the ventilator is their only option, so like their last choice?
Right. Yeah, right. That's a good thing to consider. Yeah. Obviously we can't predict the future, but based on the background information, we would suppose that patient A, being young and otherwise healthy, would have a better chance of surviving without the ventilator. But the one thing that I tried to include in the background is that both patients equally need the ventilator, and both have equally bad COVID-19 induced lung damage, to kind of even the playing field and just base it on like which patient it is. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider as well. Like who, like without the, like considering like all the options in our head, like running through all the scenarios, that's like the best thing to do um, in a bioethical case study kind of way. Okay, and then the last group 3, with Carolyn, Kaushika, and Kavish. Do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, we basically went through like very similar thought processes as other groups. We ultimately decided that we should give the ventilator to patient A, basically assuming that patient A is more likely to recover from COVID-19 and also faster compared to the frail patient if they had a ventilator. When we assumed that, we also thought this was a right choice because once patient A has recovered, and potentially left the hospital, there would be more resources for other people to use.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so considering like maybe when they're done using the ventilator, like they could have a quicker recovery, and then potentially we could give it to someone else. Like that's something interesting to consider as well. Does anyone else from that group want to say anything? No? Okay. Awesome. So that was some really good discussions you guys had. I think the main takeaway from this is like, just as like an introduction to like bioethics. Obviously, this is more of a clinical setting and less of the public health stuff that we're going to be discussing. But like, there is no clear, there's no correct answer, and obviously, people are very split on a lot of these issues, and it's really hard to determine the best course of action. But by considering things through an ethical lens, we can have these discussions, these like really important discussions, because like a lot of things in health, it's a matter of life and death, and we need to have these discussions because without them, like we might not make the right decisions. But yeah, one more thing I wanted to add is, did any of you guys discuss maybe autonomy? Like what would you guys think about letting the patients like decide? Like I know it sounds really messed up, but um I think should these patients, like should they be alerted of the situation, like hey, we only have one ventilator left at this hospital, and this is a really real situation, like this actually happened at like some of the hospitals, they ran out of ventilators during COVID-19. But do they have the right to know like the situation that's going on? Would it cause them more harm, or would it help them? Like what do you guys think?
I think the patient definitely has the right to know
Right.
because it's their body. But
Yeah.
it's a good point that like if you allow them autonomy, then the situation gets more complicated.
It
Because
definitely.
it's like what if both of them want to live, then
Mhm.
you know that doesn't help the decision of the doctor. But yeah, I think I think they should have the right to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also
Yeah.
thinking that if the patient knows that like there's only one ventilator and two patients to give it to, maybe they may decide to be transferred to a different hospital where there is an abundance of ventilators, or at least enough ventilators for that patient as well.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah, that's kind of like considering beyond the scope, which is thinking outside the box, like another hospital. Like that's good. I tried to really limit it to like one hospital, but yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And one thing that I actually thought was like, I think I would want to tell both of the patients, because I think that patient B, the old patient, I personally know that like a lot of like elderly people, they want to see like the younger, like someone who is younger than them and who hasn't lived their life yet. Like I feel like they would actually, obviously this is just like a lot of like assumption here, but like I think it would be worthwhile because maybe the elderly person might say, hey, I've lived my life. Like I know it sounds pretty sad, but like I acknowledge like the situation, and I'd rather give it to someone who has, like, as the first group mentioned, like a lot more life to live. But yeah, okay, let's move on from that. But that was just like an exercise for you guys to like really consider like ethics, like in a really like fine like microscope type fashion. But now we're gonna broaden it. Oh, we're kind of, this took a little bit of time, but these are like the main discussion topics for future meetings that we were gonna that we want to figure out like which ones do you guys want to discuss. And based on the poll from the Google form, the most desired topic was vulnerable groups, immunosuppressed and elderly in the context of COVID-19. And the second was healthcare workers' well-being and rights, followed by hospital capacity and resource shortages allocation, which was kind of what the case study was about. And then the effects of quarantine, which I think is a pretty interesting one. And then you guys also, you recommended these, like you wrote in these extra topics that you want to discuss that I've put with stars here. So I'm just gonna put out a really quick poll for you guys to vote on which topics, like the new like starred topics you guys want as well to discuss. I'm trying to figure out how to launch a poll. Oh, polling. Okay, I think I launched it. Just takes like 30 seconds to, do you guys see it? This, okay, you guys are filling it out. Great. I'm sorry, this is my first time like hosting a meeting with all of these like buttons and stuff, and I'm bad with technology. Okay, you guys are voting. Cool.
Hey, Sana, quick question.
Yeah.
When you talk about autonomy, we're talking about the patient's autonomy as opposed to the doctor's, right? Or is it both?
The patient's autonomy.
Okay, just the patient's. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a bodily autonomy, and it's also an autonomy of thought and like the ability to make their own decisions. So
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we all filled it out. Okay. Can you guys see the answers? Or, oh, here. Can you guys see them now? Okay. So you guys, okay, the best one is health inequities, socioeconomic, and okay, so I will keep this in mind for future meetings, maybe a topic for a future meeting. So this is great. Okay. So now we actually want to move into like the actual like open discussion part. I'm sorry it took this long. It's just because it was the first meeting and I kind of wanted to do a bit of an like a broad like introduction and a little activity like that. But obviously in future meetings we'll all be talking like the same amount on all these topics and stuff. But so these are the discussion topics, and for the rest I'm going to toggle between these two starter questions that I came up with. Obviously you guys can pose your own questions because you guys are the panel members, but I just gave a couple of questions based on like the most voted for discussion topics. If you guys want to, like, this is like an open floor discussion and we can discuss things through an ethical lens, but these are basically the starter questions that I came up with. You guys can read them. It's just the first one is kind of like oddly specific. I don't know why I put that one first, but it's like, how can we advocate for like the reopening of certain facilities when it may not be equitable for like certain vulnerable groups? And how can you structure a reopening model that minimizes these inequities? And then the second one is, would a prolonged quarantine like be more beneficial or more detrimental? And we can look at that from a lot of different sides of things, like socioeconomic disparities, mental health, cases, deaths. And then the third one is kind of an interesting one. Healthcare professionals are under a lot of stress at this time and have a much higher chance of contracting COVID-19 and dying. And I think this is something that someone brought up too, about like having an obligation as a healthcare provider or as a medical professional. But do these people have an obligation in this very unique time to risk their own health at such a high risk for the health of others, because a lot of times when these doctors are going into these hospitals packed with people who have COVID-19, and if a lot of doctors are kind of old too, so they're like their risk for dying is extremely high. And then lastly, a poll showed that only 49% of Americans say that they would get vaccinated against COVID-19. Should a vaccine be developed? Should the public be required to get a COVID-19 vaccine? Why or why not? This is a question of like autonomy versus like beneficence. So that's kind of the main two things at play there. So, and if you guys want to pose your own questions, it's fine. But so which you guys can just like, now it's like your turn, like say whatever you want, but which question do you guys want to talk about? Anyone have any suggestions?
Can we talk about the third one?
Yeah, definitely. The healthcare professionals. Okay, so do you guys have any opening thoughts about this? Just right off the bat.
Well, so I think like a few weeks ago there was a Time magazine article about this issue, and it was criticizing the fact that a lot of people are comparing COVID-19 to a war, because soldiers and so what the article argued was that soldiers have like an obligation, right? Because I guess that's part of, is it part of our constitution or something? But they have an obligation to go fight for the country, right? But then I think what was also mentioned was that doctors don't have the same obligation, and a lot of doctors and nurses are, continuing to work, or even leaving their homes to go to areas where there's a lack of health professionals, of their own will, to continue to treat patients. And so the article was saying, like, referring to doctors as soldiers and comparing COVID-19 to a war was not, it was downplaying the sacrifice that doctors had to make. So that article was assuming that doctors don't have the obligation. I don't know if that really helps answer the question, but
yeah, it's definitely a trick. Thank you for that. It's a tricky question, because yeah, the comparison to soldiers, like I know like when you get drafted, you like, I don't know how the logistics work, but you like sign on to like, yeah, I have an obligation to like protect my country. But the thing is, like, yes, doctors have an obligation to treat their patients, but this is such a unique situation in which the patients can actually like do harm to the doctors. Like I feel like that doesn't happen as often unless you're like an infectious disease doctor or something. But like for most healthcare professionals, like they're not fearing for their life every day when they go into the hospital. It's definitely a unique situation. So does anyone else?
I feel like I do have a point to bring up to that actually. And my brother-in-law actually is a doctor at Boston's first COVID-19 like treatment center at a hospital. And he's been struggling a lot. It's been a big risk for him. Like his partner even got diagnosed with it, but he still has to check in every day. And if you look at it from the hospital's perspective, you hired these medical professionals for a job. And although they are fully in the right, to reject it, like this is a really dangerous job, they could have immunodeficient like friends or family that they're at risk of actually passing it on to. And all like, of course you have to give them the ability to say, I'm sorry, but I actually can't help anymore. Like this will affect others in a worse way than me actually being here. But at the same time, from the hospital's perspective, you hired that person to do a job, and them rejecting to do that job is them, like in any other business world, if you just choose not to do your job, like you have an obligation to do said job, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that's a good perspective. Yeah, I think like this is kind of a hot button topic, but like when you're talking about like these like really high stakes jobs, such as like being a doctor, like a police officer and stuff, sometimes like really hard decisions have to be made. But at the end of the day, these are people who are like doing like a job, right? And the job has certain demands, and sometimes it's really, really hard. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah. So the virus isn't the only cause of the stress for a lot of these healthcare professionals, right? Like recently, a lot of them have quit because of receiving death threats from people in general. And I don't know, maybe that may have them question their own obligation if, going back to the soldier analogy, if your own country is going against you, then you lose that motivation towards your obligation in the first place. I think that may contribute to it.
Sorry, Sophie, can you just quickly elaborate on the death threat thing? Because I actually have never read that before.
Yeah, so here, amid death threats, so 7 California health officials have quit since the pandemic began, and because of receiving death threats from the public for, like asking them to wear masks in general. And I think the most recent one was in Orange County. So if you folks just look that up, it's in the headlines. So yeah, I know.
That's all.
Yeah, I know it's tough. Like I know I heard a lot of things in the news also. This was a little while ago when like there was like this like the peak of like COVID-19 cases and like hospitals were overflowing and stuff. A lot of like doctors committed suicide because it's definitely, it takes a toll on these people. At the end of the day, they are people, but they have also, they have an obligation to this job that they have signed up for. And but a lot of that obligation, yeah, like as Safi says, comes from like a motivation, and they wouldn't sign on to this obligation in the first place if they didn't have this motivation to like help people. But when sometimes things can get skewed. Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have anything to say on this topic, or do you want to maybe move on to a different question? I know we don't have that much time left. We have like one more slide based for like the committees that for the future meetings, but I just wanted to pose these like starter questions just to get us like talking and kind of get a sense for like what you guys like want to discuss in the future. This has been kind of a little bit of a disorganized panel because it's the first one. I just want to get a sense of like what do you guys want to talk about, and then the future panels it will be a lot more discussion from like everyone. Like everyone will be talking on some questions that will be posed. So any other things to say? Anybody?
If anyone else doesn't have anything to say, I'd like to add something more to the third topic, but
Go ahead.
yeah. Okay. So I think that like the wording of the prompt is interesting because obligation, like if you're obligated to do something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be comfortable doing it, right? Because parents have an obligation to raise their children, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be conflict free. So I don't know. I think that like obligation, yes, doctors may, because it's part of their job, like Mezen mentioned. So I think the obligation exists, but whether or not it's I do not have.
I see what you're saying. Oh,
yeah.
So like more like should these people risk their own health for the health of others? Like it's not necessarily a matter of yes, like by signing, like they literally have an obligation to, but should they do it? Like yeah, that's definitely.
Does it come out being more beneficial
right.
for doctors to risk their own health?
Right.
I think is the more like bioethical question.
Definitely. Yeah. Maybe we can just change it to like should they. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I just kind of like wrote these up really quick.
Yeah, I mean,
jog the conversation a little bit, but thank you for that's definitely makes a lot more sense. But yeah.
Can I actually add something to that?
Go ahead.
So I was thinking about how like people talk about doctors pledging their lives to like a lifetime of service, and because being a doctor, that is a service job, but I don't think so. I mean, there are a lot of other service jobs where your life is on the line. Like if you join the army or if you're a police officer, in those jobs you are risking your life. But I don't think, I think they do have an obligation to their patients, but I think the scope of their job has kind of like expanded now because now their lives are at risk. So that's different from what they signed on to. So I think there is a discussion to be had there about like whether their obligation is to the patient when now their lives are at risk. So it's kind of like the situation has changed.
Yeah,
So,
I think, yeah, that's something we were talking about at the beginning. And like, I think Mazen also, like, there's two sides to that coin. I think like we can say that, yes, like this isn't the expectation for a doctor's like day-to-day job. Like they don't expect to be in fear for their lives all the time. But also like as a doctor, like I think it's just like the situation that we have, like at least in America, like we I know some of you are international students, but I think maybe we're considering this in like the context of like a traditional first world like country or something where like that risk is minimized. But obviously being a doctor somewhere else or being a doctor during a pandemic, it can really just like stretch the definition of like what is a doctor and what should a doctor be, or healthcare professional or nurse or anything. What is their duties and what are they expected to do? Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think you guys really liked discussing this topic. Are a lot of you guys pre-med? I think you guys are. I don't know. Like raise your hand if you're yeah. Anyone?
I have raised my hand. I'm like in a state of confusion.
Okay. Thumbs up, Jenny. State of confusion. Okay, yeah, I felt that too. I felt that for a while. Yeah, okay. Cool. And even if are you guys like public health majors or something? Or like I remember on the forum, like some of you guys said you were like physics majors or something, but like I'm glad you're interested in this. But yeah, obviously as like pre-med students, these are very important questions. Okay, so just wrapping it up. Sorry, we have like 1 minute, but I'm glad we had these good discussions. Future meetings will not be all this mumbo jumbo in the beginning. It'll be just you guys discussing, and then it'll be really great because once we have you into committees, we can do committee research presentations. We can draft like actual resolutions like on our own time and stuff, and like get together to present to campus officials and others. And then we can invite some guest speakers. And then I think I started recording our discussion a little bit late today, but they can be used as a lasting resource for the campus community. So without further ado, what committees would you guys like to be in? I should have made a poll for this. Let me make a poll like really quickly. Oh, but are polls anonymous? They are anonymous. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna go through, like write your names down next to each committee. Who wants to be in like the reopening committee discussing how schools and jobs and just like countries as a whole can safely reopen, like an equitable and safe reopening? Does anyone want to be in that committee? Annika, okay. Okay, let me try to think. Anyone else? Oh, I know some of you don't have your video on. Just like pipe up if you want to be in this committee. Just like say something. Okay, is it just Annika? Okay, that's fine for now because I know a lot of people like a lot of people like said they couldn't make it today, but
it's really sad if it's just me.
Yeah,
though.
no, it's fine. I'll be in the committee with you if it's just you, but I'm sure someone else wants to be in this committee who's not here today. Okay, quarantine committee. Wait, hello? Did someone say something?
Yeah.
Hi.
Can you give an overview of what the other two are?
Right, okay. So quarantine committee is discussing like the effects of quarantine. I'd recommend this committee if you're like into like psych and stuff, and because I think we're gonna be this committee is gonna be discussing like obviously quarantine is beneficial, but what are like the adverse effects that quarantine can have to mental health, and like some of like the facts and statistics about like I know like domestic abuse has gone up and stuff. So like is quarantine doing more harm than help? It's a question of like beneficence versus like non-maleficence, but considering COVID-19 quarantine in that lens, that ethical lens. So, and then healthcare committee is kind of more of this question that we were discussing about healthcare professionals and like hospital resources. Kind of today's been more of like a healthcare committee kind of day. So yeah, that's basically it. And these are committees that you guys will be like breaking into during like portions of the meeting. Like the whole meeting, we will have these like open discussions like we had today where everyone's contributing to these like big topics, big issues, big questions, but these are kind of like your little specialization for like a portion of the meeting. So quarantine committee, anyone raise your hand or like say something? Nobody?
The quarantine committee?
Safi? Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Anyone who doesn't have their video on?
I would like to be in the quarantine committee too.
Okay, awesome. Who are you? I'm sorry. What is your name?
Safia.
Safia. Oh, okay. Awesome. Okay. And I'm sure you guys will have more members too, because like there's only like what 11 people here, and like there's 21 people who are like actually like part of this. Okay. And then I'm guessing healthcare committee is the rest of you guys? Yeah? Okay.
Actually,
Yeah,
can I
just
be in the reopening?
Sorry?
Actually, can I be in the reopening?
Oh, okay. Is this Victoria? Okay. I'll add myself to reopening too. I'm sure more will be in the quarantine committee. I hope. And you guys can like switch this around. It's
Can I also be in reopening?
who? Anisha?
Yeah.
You go by Isha or Anisha?
Anisha.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I misheard you when you introduced yourself. Okay. Cool. And then I'm guessing the rest of you are in the healthcare committee. Just like, can you guys just shout out your names? This is bad. I wish I made a poll. Kashika.
Mazen.
Caroline. And then Jenny.
Is that everyone?
I think we're missing one person. Oh, no. So did someone leave?
Kavish? Maybe
Yeah,
he
Kavish.
left.
Yeah.
Maybe he was bored. That's okay. Okay, I'm just gonna. It's okay. I'm sending out a Google form for everyone who wasn't here. But okay, this is you guys got the first choices. So okay. Thank you guys for being here. I'm sorry that we went a little bit over time, but I hope you guys got a sense of like kind of the things that we'll be discussing in this meeting. And the next meeting will be possibly in a couple weeks or so, just whenever everyone's free. I'll send out another one to meet. But for this next meeting, you guys can I'll provide the emails of like everyone here, so you guys can kind of get together with your committee and maybe brainstorm some things. So thank you guys for being here. If you have any more questions, just let me know. Otherwise, have a great Friday. Oh, it's Friday. Okay. Yes.
Can you go over what the committees will be doing again?
Right. Okay. So during each meeting, I just try to have like a loose structure to make sure that you guys are kind of the ones that are going to be guiding like the meetings, because we're all like panelists here and I want us all to like contribute. So I didn't really want to go through like a presentation like this like each time. I want like everyone to be talking and stuff. So basically how the meetings will go is there'll be like a discussion topic of the meeting, and we'll go through some questions and case studies in that discussion topic, and it'll be like a more specific topic and like under one of these umbrellas. But then also we'll have like some time set aside during the meeting when you guys can be in breakout rooms with your committees, and you guys like in those committees you will discuss like what kind of questions, what kind of topics do you want to explore more in depth. And once you decide that, then you can start researching those topics on your own time, maybe meeting with your committees, and then kind of towards like the end, I don't know when this panel is going to end because obviously COVID-19 is going to have some lasting effects, but you guys can create some like research presentations to show the panel, and possibly like you guys have like full like autonomy here, like you can do whatever you want. And something, if you're into policy, you can draft like I know some people are really good at this, like drafting like resolutions. Like I personally don't have any experience in this, but like people who are into like legal stuff and public policy, you can draft some like resolutions to show like policymakers or campus officials, which could be really cool. But that's basically this, like the committees is just to go a little bit deeper and have a little bit more substance coming out of the discussion. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, any more questions, or everyone just ready to go. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. I'll send out an email like recapping everything. Bye.